الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, we continue with the tafsir of Surah Nisa from ayah number 26. Today, inshallah, we'll cover 26, 27 and 28, inshallah. I'll read the three ayahs first and then we go into explaining what these three ayahs are about, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يريد الله ليبين لكم ويهديكم سنن الذين من قبلكم ويتوب عليكم والله عليم حكيم. It is Allah's will to make things clear to you, guide you to the ways of those before you, and turn to you in mercy, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Then in the next ayah, 27, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَن يَتُوبَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَيُرِيدُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ أَن تَمِيلُوا مَيْلًا عَظِيمًا. And it is Allah's will to turn to you in grace, but those who follow their desires wish to see you deviate entirely, meaning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. Then in the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَنْكُمْ وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. And it is Allah's will to lighten your burdens, for humankind was created weak. In all three ayahs you can see وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ, yuridullah, and yuridullah again. Allah's will, Allah wants to. Yeah? So as you know, in the Quran, most of the Quran is not about laws and fiqh and sharia and ahkam. It's only, they say, about 500 ayahs are related directly with laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with sharia or with ahkam, to be more precise. About 500 ayahs. Out of how many ayahs in the Quran? Over 6,000 ayahs. Less than 10% of the ayahs are to do with ahkam, legal injunctions, rules, law. The rest of the Quran, or the major portion of the Quran, is what? Is about the akhirah, is about the previous messengers and the nations they were sent to, and is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, his names, his attributes, what he loves, what he dislikes for his creation. So you can see the rules of Islam, the rules of the Quran, even if we say it's 10% or less, is covered and surrounded by 90%, not to do with rules and ahkam, but in a way you can summarize those three things. Akhirah, akhirah includes day of judgment, hellfire, Jannah, what will happen after you die, and about the messengers and how they were sent with the guidance to all the previous nations, and about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So you can summarize those three aspects as being what? As motivating us, guiding us to following the 10%. So 90% of the Quran is to do with motivating us, reminding us why we should follow the 10% of the rules and ahkam of the Quran. Otherwise, whole Quran could have been rules, regulation, halal, haram, just long list like you get in the books of law, books of fiqh. This is halal, this is haram, you don't do this, there's 5 fard in this, 4 sunnah in this. Could have been a list. But that's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. He wants to motivate you, He wants to remind you, He wants to create a remembrance in you. He wants you to long for paradise. He wants you to be longing, wishing, hoping, putting paradise as your target, motivating you emotionally, in your heart, in your mind, intellectually, every way. And He wants to put the fear of the hellfire, of punishment, in your hearts and minds. So this is the majority of the Quran. And He wants to motivate you by reminding you of what happened to the nations previously. So the majority of the Quran is going towards motivating you, creating in you hope and fear, both for the akhirah. Why? To follow the small number of injunctions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, the laws, the rules, that will give you ultimately that success, because the success is not dependent on whether you remember the akhirah or not. It's not dependent on whether you just believe in the messengers or not. It's also dependent on whether you submit and surrender and follow the guidance, the rules, the regulations, the halal and the haram, the ahkam, the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these three ayahs, they say, has come, as you know, this is from ayah number 26. So from ayah number 1 to 25, Surah An-Nisa was all ahkam, mainly rules and regulations. It began with reminding people that they were created from a single pair. Mankind was created from a single father and mother. And then there was reminders about how to treat the rights of orphans, orphan girls, orphans in general in terms of their wealth. Then there was rules, regulation to do with inheritance, rules and regulations to do with marriage and divorce, etc., until we come to ayah number 26. So ayah number 21 to 25, you can see these are the ahkam, these are the laws. Now in these three ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to motivate you to follow those rules. Why should you follow these rules? He's giving you the laws, He's giving you the inheritance. It should be this portion for the mother, this portion for the wife, for the husband, for the son, the daughter. With orphans, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. Now, where's the motivation to implement that? This is these three ayahs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give us now why He's giving you these laws, in which way, and how to motivate you. You will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala motivating you to follow those rules. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, first of all, in this ayah 26? He says that يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَكُمْ وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ سُنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. It is Allah's will to make things clear to you, guide you to the noble ways of those before you. So why did Allah give you those rules, regulations? Ayah number 1 to 25, or previously within those ayahs. Why does it give you laws, halal, haram, do this, don't do this? Because He wants to make things clear to you. لِيُبَيِّنَ لَكُمْ, number 1. Bayan is to make something clear, give its details, make it clear. Al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin. The halal is clear and the haram is clear. It means that there's no confusion. Allah wants to leave you in a clear instruction. This is halal, this is haram. This is beneficial for you, this is harmful for you. So the first reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you those injunctions in the previous ayahs is to make things clear for you, to give you the detailed clarity of what rules Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to follow. So there's no confusion. What is the ruling on this? What is the ruling with regards to that? No confusion. It's clear. He's given you sufficient detail in those ayahs. وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ, and to guide you to what? سُنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. He wants to guide you to the ways of those who came before you. In other words, you're not the first people to be given these rules. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to say that I am not the first to be sent as a prophet. This is not a bid'ah from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam that he came, he's the first prophet in mankind. No, there's been many messengers before him. It's nothing new. It's a sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send prophets. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the same appeal, that you're not the first people for me to give you rules and regulations for your benefit, for your success. There were rules and regulations given to those who came before you, meaning the best of those who came before you. Rules and regulations were given to messengers before you, to the followers of those messengers who were successful, who obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who surrendered to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are marked out for Jannah inshaAllah. They were given the rules, and therefore just like them, Allah wants to guide you with the rules and regulations. So this is now Allah motivating you. Why should I follow those rules? Well, we're not the first people to be given these responsibilities. You know, fathers, if they've got 2, 3 children, daughters or sons, and the eldest one does something, has to go college, university, then get a job, has to work. Then the next one comes, he has to follow the same footstep. And the father will say, well, you have to go to uni, you have to work, you have to earn money. You're not the first. Look at your older brother, he did the same. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, look, you're not the first. You're not the only people to have been given rules and regulations. The best of you who came before you, they were given the same responsibility, same rules and regulations. And this is one of the greatest features of the Qur'an. It's never about simply dry list of halal and haram. The Qur'an, like I said, less than 10% is about ahkam. The rest is really to remind us, motivate us, create a longing, a longing for the akhirah, a longing to enter into Jannah, to be successful on the Day of Judgment, and a motivation to surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to improve ourselves, be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to earn His mercy. So these injunctions, obviously the previous injunctions were mainly to do with marriage, who you can marry, which women you can't marry, the issue about mahar and things like that. So these are injunctions which were given to previous nations, previous prophets, previous peoples. One thing to remember is what we say again and again, that Islam, broadly speaking, there's only one truth. Islam is not new. Its ahkam, broadly speaking, in general, is not new. The Sharia, different Sharia being given to different prophets, but the core of the Sharia, of the halal haram, mostly is the same. There's some adjustments here and there, different times, different peoples, for different reasons. But the core of the Sharia is the same. And Aqidah is the same anyway, belief in Allah, belief in all the messengers, belief in the Day of Judgment, etc. This is always the same. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always connects us to the previous messengers, previous people. So it's very important to understand Islam is not a new religion. There's only one deen in the sight of Allah, which is Islam, not just the Islam that came with the Prophet ﷺ. One deen meaning at all times it was whatever Allah revealed. At the time of Musa alayhi salam, that was also Islam. They were also Muslim, those who believed and followed Musa alayhi salam. All of the messengers are Muslims. So it's one deen for all times, it's universal. There's not 50 different religions, true religions. There's only one true deen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed through His messengers and the books that He has revealed. So what does that mean? That also means that, broadly speaking, the standards of what is right and wrong doesn't change. The laws Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave just in those previous ayahs, in Surah Nisa and other surahs, they're not very different to the previous laws. In other words, Islam is saying the standard of what is right and wrong, what is morally correct, what is good today, what is bad today, what is harmful today, what is beneficial for you today, in terms of moral rules, halal, haram, is the same throughout history, is the same for all human beings. Because from Adam alayhi salam to now, human beings are the same. They haven't evolved from Adam alayhi salam to now. There's no evolution from Adam alayhi salam to now. Whether or not there's evolution before that, that's a different story. But there's no evolution. From Adam alayhi salam, he was built, created as a perfect stature of a human, physical human specimen. And from him to now, there's no evolution, there's no changes. He had the same strengths and weaknesses, human capabilities, same desires, same longing, same weakness, same strengths as all other human beings. There's no difference. And therefore, what was beneficial to Adam alayhi salam, what was harmful for Adam alayhi salam is the same for us. It's one constant truth, is one constant framework of what is right, what is wrong, what is beneficial for human beings in terms of development spiritually, physically, as individuals, families and communities, was always the same. It's one same blueprint, if you like. And this was always encompassed by whichever sharia Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave. The first murder, the first killing happens with the sons of Adam alayhi salam. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. There's no change, right? And this is, we have to understand as Muslims, because this is in contrast to what most people believe these days, based on the idea of continuous human progress. So the idea is that the more time passes, the more knowledgeable, the more advanced we become, and hence the more enlightened we become. So the past, that's why the average person today thinks the past, people who lived in the past are backwards. We know more than them. They were barbaric, they were brutal, they were backward, they were uncivilized. The more we progress, the more civilized we become, the more enlightened, the more knowledgeable, the more scientific, etc., etc. Because the dominant view of history is that it's a linear, progressive line. It's one constant progression, right? From the further back in time you go, the worse off people were. The less knowledgeable they were more superstitious, backward, believing in myths and tradition and just fairy tales and folkloric kind of beliefs. And the further you come to present day and the future, the more progress there will be, right? This is how most people think. This is how most people have been educated and kind of propagated to. This is the mistake of equating material and technological advancement with human and moral ethical flourishing. What does that mean? This is the mistake. Why do people believe that? Easily believe it because they think, yeah, that's true. Look at the lives we're living. We're flying in airplanes. 200 years ago, no such thing existed. Today we can talk to someone in China, in Bangladesh, in India. We can communicate immediately. So they look at the massive, and no one can deny that, the huge, colossal technological advancement, material progress. They look at that and they think, yeah, that's true. The more history progresses, the more time passes, the more advanced people become. So it's very easy to believe, right? But that advancement in material and technological advancement is not the same as advancing and improving as a moral human being. It's not the same thing, right? You just have to look at the past 3-4 centuries. How many peoples were wiped out from their own lands? Whether it's North America, the Americas, South America. How many wars where people were just bombed and killed, innocent civilians? First World War, Second World War, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, civilians, atomic bomb on the civilians, right? How many species have been made extinct because of our habits and behavior? How much oppression and injustice has there been in the last few centuries alone? And not to mention that we, through this advancement of technology, science, we're so enlightened and advanced that we're almost destroying the whole planet. So obviously something's gone wrong. Yes, we've advanced materially, technologically, but something has gone drastically wrong in the moral front, on the moral front. As human beings, we haven't flourished. We have not flourished as human beings. And this is, this is important because it connects the two ayahs. Because as Muslims, we believe that the Prophet ﷺ, his generation was the best. Khairul Quruni Qarni. The best of generations is my generation. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then those who come after them. Said it 3 times. And then it's downwards, more or less. Morally, ethically, in terms of relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of surrender, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as moral human beings, we believe it's a downward thing, number one, generally, but overall it's a cyclical thing. It cycles. History is not from the top all the way down. No, it cycles. Whenever a messenger is sent, when the people respond to him, then they're raised up morally. They're high. They're on a high level. Then there's a decline, right? Then another messenger is sent. Then morally, ethically, as human beings, these communities, they rise up again. So it's a cycle up and down. It's not all the way from the highest to the lowest. But generally, especially after the Prophet, so we're in the last cycle, which is the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even there we believe that it's cyclical, but the past is not weaker and less than the future. Of course we can't believe that because we know the best generations were the Sahaba. But it's not all doom and gloom because, there's a saying attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is he also gave hope. He said, I don't know which part of whether it's in the beginning or the end, which part is better in terms of barakah for the ummah. And there will be revival every 100 years. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, well, not 100, doesn't have to be 100, but they said every generation there will be a reviver of the deen. So there will be small cycles up and down. But the general thing is, in Islam, we don't subscribe to the theory that history is a linear progression. The further back you go, the lower, worse off you are as human beings. And the further you come to present day and future, everything advances and you become better human beings and societies. No, we don't subscribe to that. We say it's cyclical. We say it's connected to how close you are in terms of submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, following a messenger, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls His nations to rise and decline. So this is the general picture, right? And we'll come to why that's connected to this ayah. The way it's connected directly is because Allah said, this is the sunnah of people who went before you. So the sunnah of people that came before you, Allah wants to guide you. Allah wants to guide us to their sunnah. So if we believe that history is progressive upwards like this, why should we follow the people who came before us? They would be lower than us. No, in Islam we believe, like I said, if they were following the messengers, then they're higher. They're on a higher level. Whereas the dominant belief today is all peoples of the past, we are better than them. We're more advanced, we know the truth, we have scientific discoveries, we know what's true and false, we don't believe in superstitions, folkloric, fairy tales. We're beyond that, right? So there is a big contrast and difference between how Islam sees history and how other people see history. That's very important to understand. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu yuridu an yatuba alaykum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and it is Allah's will that He wants to turn to you. Yatuba alaykum, from the word tawbah. We understand tawbah as meaning what? When we ask Allah, when we stop committing a sin, or we stop committing sins, and we ask Allah, we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask His forgiveness. That's tawbah. Tawbah literally means to turn around. You're going in the wrong path, you turn around back to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here Allah says, Wallahu yuridu an yatuba alaykum. Allah wants to turn to you. Allah wants to turn to you. Not obviously Allah doesn't make He doesn't make tawbah to you in that sense, but He wants to turn to you in giving you His mercy, sending His blessings, accepting your tawbah, accepting your turning. If you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will open the door of Allah turning to you. Meaning, if you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His guidance, and you make His criteria the determining criteria and framework for halal, haram, for right and wrong, for beneficial, what's beneficial and harmful, just like the people of the past did, then Allah will turn to you and send His blessings and mercy and accept your turning, accept your tawbah, turning to Him in surrender and acceptance of His moral and ethical guidelines and rules and regulations. But this is a very important part. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the same ayah, after He says, Wallahu yuridu an yatuba alaykum, Allah wants to, that it's His will to turn to you. وَيُرِيدُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ أَن تَمِيلُوا مَيْلًا عَظِيمًا. But those who follow their desires, الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ, those who follow their desires or the desires, wish to see you deviate, أَن تَمِيلُوا مَيْلًا عَظِيمًا. They wish to see you deviate entirely away from Allah, away from Allah's path, away from Allah's way. In other words, because the previous ayahs were talking about marriage and which women you can marry, which ones you can't, what's a halal relationship, etc. So some of the mufassirun, they said that as for those who follow their desires, which includes those who don't want to have a halal relationship through marriage, fornicators, adulterers, peoples and nations who follow false creeds and desires, who don't recognize the restrictions given by divine revelation of halal and haram, they make no distinction between lawful and unlawful. Not only do they practice that themselves, they want you to follow them, because they're on a path away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they want you to turn and follow their path. Allah wants you to turn and follow His path, so He turns to you in His blessings and mercy and acceptance. But those who follow their desires, their shahawat, they don't want to follow the guidelines of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But not only that, they're not happy with just doing it themselves. They want you to follow them as well, right? And this is really very relevant today and really important, because in today's world, we can see it everywhere amongst us, in our communities and societies. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used a beautiful description. It's so amazing. Of course, it's revelation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the future. He knows the inner workings of human beings. He says, وَيُرِيدُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ. Those who follow their desires, they desire, they want. So the opposite of following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, divine revelation of standards of halal, haram, good, bad, right, wrong, is to follow your desire, shahawat, right? This is so pertinent to us today, because out there in society, wherever you go, what is the criterion for good and bad? What is the criteria for something that is acceptable, something that is good, something that is morally good, and something that is bad? People don't use the word morals anymore anyway. Just say what is good, what is bad. What is the criteria? The criteria is shahawat. Because now, today, what is good is whatever I think is good. If I wish to do X, Y, Z, then I should be free to do so. And you have no right to tell me that this is wrong. If I wish to say something about the institution of marriage, if the society or community decides that marriage, living in marriage as a married couple and living outside of marriage just as partners, living together, is the same thing. There's no difference in their values. One is not better than the other. What dictates that? Simply, I feel like that. It's my opinion. It's my thought. It's my desire. It's my judgment. I believe there's no difference between marriage and not being married, having the same relation. It's all equal. There's no difference between some forms of marriage. It's all equal. Why? Because it's following shahawat. So the criteria today is based on individual, subjective opinions. In other words, where does your opinion come from? If there's no external guidelines, if you're not following the guidelines from somewhere else, if it's just your opinion, where does it come from? Mainly from shahawat, from your desire, your opinion. Right? This is what they call in philosophy or ethics, voluntarism, right? The idea that my will, my desire, decides what is good, what is bad. If I want this form of marriage, or if I think this thing is good, acceptable, this way of living, then so be it. That is and you can see how when people make those judgments and decisions in community societies, if you don't accept it, you become the person who's wrong. You are wrong. You are anti this, anti that. You become the one who's wrong, and they become the one who's right. Why? Because it's based on shahawat. Everyone follows their desire. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. Those who follow their desires, they want you to follow, turn away from Allah and follow their path. And the reason why people do this, we have to also understand, without getting too technical, is the reason why do they say we can't make a judgment on what is right or wrong? Because when people come to the conclusion that there's no truth out there, what's happened in most societies through the last few centuries is when they've kind of let go of religion in a way, not everybody, but a large portion. When they've let go of religion and divine revelation and no longer believe in the truth of the Bible, of the revealed books, they realize that, well, if that's not true, then it's down to us to decide what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. It's down to us. We decide. And there's no objective truth out there, even in nature, in creation. There's no such thing as this is good and this is bad. It's all based on what I project onto nature, on reality. If we think this is good, then it's good. If we think this is bad, then it's bad. And you've heard the phrase, playing God. That's what people do. They decide what is good, So once you believe there's no objective truth out there, there's no external guidance for what is right or wrong, then obviously you have to become the judge. And when you become the judge, you also accept that actually, you know what, there's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no such thing. It's whatever we decide. So then you end up saying, marriage as an institution, this was only something in the past. People got together, whether they thought it was from religion or not. They got together and they agreed, this is a good thing. That's why it's good. It was good. But now we've agreed it's not necessary. So once you believe there's no objective truth out there, we are the ones who decide what is right or wrong, then you end up simply following your shahawat. This is what it is. And we can see where that's going down to. You can see it in every field. Whether it's in gender relations, whether it's in forms of marriage, whether it's in certain acts that you can do or you can't do, foods you can eat or not eat, drinks, whatever it is, in every field, the criterion is what I desire, what I want. I should be free to do what I wish and follow my desires. There's no other criteria. So what happens then? There's no fixed criteria. With Islam, with divine revelation, as I mentioned before, the criteria of right and wrong is fixed from throughout history, for all nations, for all peoples, for all times, broadly, with slight adjustments here and there. But with this model, there's no stable, fixed right or wrong. Every generation will have their right and wrong. Every generation you will see changes. Every community will have their own judgments of what is right and wrong, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Gender relations, which sexes can get married and they can't get married, will be decided just arbitrarily, whatever people desire. Who is a man, who is a woman? Oh, there's no objective truth out there. There's no such thing as a man and a woman. Don't be silly. There's no objective truth there, right? It's we decide who's a man or who's a woman. And so on. Soon it's going to be deciding, who's a human being and who's an animal, right? Transhumanism, not transgender, transhumanism. So, in other words, it goes back to there's no objective reality out there. You, as a human being even, is not a fixed thing. It's me who makes you a human being because I put that label on you. I view you as a human being. or I view you as a man, I view you as a woman. So where does that go to? We can see where it's going to end up in, because there's no criteria, there's no fixed values. It's free flow, it's open to go anywhere, right? So this is the way out is to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to turn to an objective source of morality, of right and wrong, of what is good and bad. The Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one who knows us the best. He's the one who knows the true nature of every created thing. And He's given us this fixed guideline, Unfortunately, people think, even amongst Muslims, they fall for this. This rhetoric about, Islamic law and guidance and values of right and wrong. This is so old, man, like 1400 years old. How could they have known what's right or wrong or good or bad for our society today? They didn't have this same problems, they didn't have the same technology, they didn't have the same knowledge. Even Muslims fall for this. They say, no, Sharia, leave that to the side. This is medieval, man, this is old, they can't cope. This is kufr. For someone to say that, it's kufr. If you think any part of Sharia is not suitable for today, or is not up to the job, or it's deficient in some way, or the criteria that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, this is kufr, this is rejection of the faith. This is rejection. So unfortunately, Muslims also fall into this. So it's very important for us to be aware that where does our morals, standards come from? Where does our sense of right and wrong comes from, and why does it come in that way? Why is it so fixed? This is a lot of people ask this. The first question, I do quite a bit of training for non-Muslims, Islam awareness. When it comes to Sharia, the most common question is, why can't you change the Sharia? Why is it so fixed? Why doesn't it move with the times? This is the first question a lot of people ask. Because they have this idea, Sharia, 1400 years old, how can it keep up with today? How can it be applicable or beneficial today? So you see this pressure. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those who follow their own desires, they want you to turn completely away as well. That's why you have these pressure groups, campaign groups, questioning the Muslim communities, questioning Islam. Why can't Islam adapt and change? Why can't you give women more rights? Why can't you just bring yourself up to speed, up to the modern world? Why can't you do X, Y, and Z? Look at your punishments, it's so barbaric. Why can't you adapt and change? Why haven't you had your enlightenment like we had? These are the questions, because people naturally, they want you to follow them. They think they're more advanced, this is better, this is more liberal, fairer, equality, etc. And they want you to follow and turn away from your source of guidance. They want you to turn away from the guidance criterion set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next ayah, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَنْكُمْ وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. As I said in the beginning, these three ayahs about motivating you to follow the criterion and the guidelines set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the ahkam that He gave, in the laws that He gave. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? And it is Allah's will to lighten your burdens. Allah wants to make it easy for you, lighten your burdens. Why? وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. For mankind was created weak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows what we can bear, what we can't bear. He knows what we can implement, what we can't. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is explaining that the rules that I've given you before in Surah Nisa and throughout the Qur'an, these are not to make things difficult. These are not to make things difficult for you. These are not heavy, burdensome things. He's made it light for you. He's made it easy for you. And in the specific rules above, in the other ayahs, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the option, if you can't afford to get married in those days, He gave other outlets. Or with the regards to mahar, He left it open that you can agree on a very simple mahar. He's made it easy. He's lightened the burden on you. You don't have to be burdened with this, I can't afford to get married with a massive amount of mahar. I can't afford to pay. No, He's made it easy. Most of the halal things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's made it very easy. Why? Because He wants to make this deen easy for you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding you that His laws are not just a lawgiver, do this, do that. He's doing it with an attitude of caring, of making it easy for you. So He's maintaining, what is it in your capacity? He's maintaining your benefit for your benefit. What is it you can do? And He's showing His love and care towards His slaves through this. And He's reminding us that the deen is easy, right? This deen is not about hardship. This deen is easy, and not only that, everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to do is for our benefit, our maslahah. Maslahah, benefit doesn't translate maslahah quite properly, but maslahah means benefit, but also means something that sets you right, something that repairs you, fixes you, makes you right, nurtures you, grows you, maslahah. And His ahkam and rules that He gives, it avoids the mafsada, things that corrupt you, things that make you, things that are harmful, things that are not beneficial to you. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in many other places, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ, in Surah Al-Hajj 78, He said, and He has not made in this deen upon you any haraj, any difficulty, right? يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرِ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرِ, in Surah Al-Baqarah, that Allah wants for you ease, yusr, وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرِ, He does not want hardship for you. And so forth. So other in the hadith, إِنَّ هَذَا الدِّينِ يُسْرِ وَلَا يُشَادَّ هَذَا الدِّينِ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih hadith that this deen is easy, yusr, and nobody makes it difficult upon himself, meaning he takes a path, he wants to do everything too much and takes overburden himself in this deen, except that it will overburden him, it will defeat him, it will overtake him. So this deen is easy, it's in the Qur'an, it's in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ has said it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this last ayah, He's reminding us that He cares for us. He's made this deen easy. Why has He made it easy? Because He says, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, that insan was made weak. Generally weak, we can't carry too many responsibilities, but also in relation to the ayahs before this ayah, to do with marriage and other things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that option to get married easily. Otherwise men are too weak to prevent themselves from falling into sin if they're told to become celibate for the rest of their lives, or that marriage was so hard they couldn't get married. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us that you're weak, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful, is so caring to you, He's made His deen so easy for you. So in these three ayahs, as I mentioned in the beginning, we'll wrap up here inshallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never gives you rules and regulations without giving you the motivation to implement them. Without giving you the motivation to implement. And this is the unique feature of the Qur'an. Really, subhanAllah, it's amazing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever He talks about a hukum, a rule, that this is halal, this is haram, or do this, don't do this, He always starts it off with some kind of motivation. Either He will appeal to us by saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who have believed. Or after giving you the rule, He will give you a reason why you should implement it. Why is it good for you? Or He will give you what is the reward for it, or what is the punishment for it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always appealing to our hearts, our intellects, to our souls, to make it easier for us to implement whatever He commands us to do. All of this is for our own benefit. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be motivated, be encouraged, to surrender and submit to His guidance and to His ahkam, inshaAllah. May He increase us in our understanding of the Qur'an. Inshallah, we'll stop here and continue next week, inshallah.